Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and set the stage for what is, honestly, one of the most rigorous intellectual duels in 20th century economic theory. You see, when the third volume of Karl Marx's Capital finally dropped, it's not like the entire world of bourgeois economics threw a massive jubilant party. But there was one huge exception: the psychological school, led by Eugene von Böhm Bawerk. He went right for the jugular. He systematically attacked the very foundations of Marxist economics, basically announcing that the labor theory of value was dead in the water. So today, we're going to unpack this high-stakes debate step by step, looking closely at the meticulous defense built by Marxist economist Rudolf Hilferding.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the battle of economics, searching for true value, the skilled labor question, the profit contradiction, and finally, equalizing the rate. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The battle of economics, the psychological school versus Marxism.
Section 2. Searching for true value. What exactly makes a commodity?
So the psychological school, led by Böhm Bawerk, didn't just nitpick around the edges. They systematically attacked Marxist economics right at its starting point, the commodity itself. Böhm Bawerk argues that Marx manipulated his argument. How? By arbitrarily throwing out the gifts of nature. Think soil, the wood in trees, water power, just to force human labor to be the only common denominator in exchangeable goods. Böhm Bawerk asks, wait, why shouldn't scarcity or good old supply and demand dictate value? But Hilferding pushes back hard here. He counters that Böhm Bawerk is completely confusing natural qualities with social ones. For Hilferding and Marx, when we exchange goods, we are literally stripping away all their natural, specific use values to reveal a purely social relationship. The idea is that nature gives things utility, sure, but society gives them value.
That brings us to Hilferding's strict definition of a commodity. It's not just a product of labor, it's a good that actively enters into a relationship with other goods through the act of exchange. Think about an atomized society where private producers are all just working independently. In that setup, the commodity acts as the glue, the social bond. It's basically an economic term representing human social relationships that are just wearing the mask of physical objects.
Section 3. The skilled labor question. The circular logic of exchange.
Now, Böhm Bawerk spots what he thinks is a massive, glaring hole. Marx claims that all value is reducible to simple, unskilled average labor. But how does that actually work in the real world? Say you have a sculptor's finished masterpiece, and it's worth 5 times as much as a pile of stones broken by a manual laborer. How do we prove that mathematically? Marx argues that experience and a social process determine this ratio over time. Böhm Bawerk attacks this head-on. He says, look, if the sculptor's work is worth 5 times more simply because society says so through the exchange rate, well then the entire law of value completely breaks down into arbitrary circular logic. You're using the price to explain the value instead of using value to explain the price.
Hilferding parries this attack by digging into how skilled labor is actually created from the standpoint of society. It's not magic, right? It's a structured process. First, it takes a ton of unskilled labor just to train and educate the skilled worker. Think about the teachers, the people making textbooks, the folks gathering resources. Second, all of that formative labor is stored up. It becomes latent within the skilled worker. And finally, when that worker actually creates something, like our sculptor, all that stored up labor is released all at once as unified skilled labor.
To really drive this home, Hilferding uses a brilliant analogy straight from the source text. Imagine you've got 10 individual storage batteries. Use all 10 of them to charge up a single massive accumulator battery, capable of driving a huge piece of machinery. Just as the power of those 10 smaller batteries is condensed into one unified force, multiple unskilled labors from across society condense into a single highly productive skilled labor force. So in this view, skilled labor is literally just unskilled labor multiplied.
Section 4. The profit contradiction. The ultimate critique.
All right, we've arrived at the heaviest blow leveled by Böhm Bawerk, and this one focuses entirely on the real-world behavior of capital and profit. According to strict Marxist theory, only living human labor creates new surplus value, which is essentially the unpaid labor that generates a capitalist's profit. Machines and raw materials, they don't create new value. So following that logic, highly mechanized factories with very few workers should produce way less surplus value and therefore less profit than factories packed wall-to-wall with human labor. But out in the actual real-world economy, equal amounts of capital yield identical average profits, completely regardless of whether that money was spent on fancy machines or on human wages. Let's look directly at Marx's own data to see this problem clearly.
Take 5 different capitals, each totaling 100 units, but with wildly different organic compositions. Some spend 80 on machines and 20 on labor, others 60 on machines and 40 on labor. But notice the rate of surplus value. It is absolutely identical across the board at 100%. So despite the totally different setups, the rate of exploitation of the worker is exactly the same in every single factory.
But look at the actual results here. Because only the living labor produces surplus value, the total surplus value generated varies wildly, from 5 all the way to 40. And consequently, the rate of profit is all over the place. It's 5% in the highly mechanized factory and 40% in the labor-heavy one. Böhm Bawerk basically points a finger at this and says, aha, your theory says profits should be completely different, but reality proves they are the same. The theory is shipwrecked on the rocks of reality.
Section 5. Equalizing the rate. The social stock company.
So, how on earth does Marxist theory resolve this glaring contradiction without just abandoning the law of value entirely? Well, the crucial point is right here in this quote from Marx himself. Capitalists do not strictly pocket the specific surplus generated inside their own individual factories. Instead, they act kind of like shareholders in a giant social stock company. All the profit is pooled together and then uniformly divided based on the size of the investment, not the specific composition of the factory itself.
Hilferding walks us through the math behind this. If we take all 5 of those individual capitals of 100 that we just looked at and combine them into a single total social capital of 500, we find a brand new average. Out of that 500 total, the average composition across the whole economy is 390 spent on constant capital, like machines, and 110 spent on variable capital, which is labor. That gives us a total social surplus value of 110. Let's just take a second to digest that.
When you divide that total surplus value of 110 by the total capital of 500, you'll see that the average composition results in a uniform mean rate of profit of 22% across the entire economy. Basically, every single block of 100 capital gets a 22% profit, completely regardless of how many humans or machines happen to be sitting in that specific factory.
But how does this actually play out in practice? Well, as the theory outlines, it happens through market prices. Commodities are not sold at their exact pure labor values. To equalize that profit rate at 22% for everyone, some commodities are actually sold at prices above their true value, while others are sold below their true value. These deviations perfectly balance each other out across the entirety of society.
The mechanism driving this whole balancing act is pure competition. Capital is ruthless, right? It immediately withdraws from spheres with low rates of profit and invades spheres that yield a higher rate. This constant emigration and immigration of capital rapidly shifts supply and demand, adjusting prices until the average profit is exactly the same everywhere. This dynamic, messy process is exactly what transforms pure theoretical labor values into the actual prices of production that we see in the market every single day.
Ultimately, this intellectual duel shows us 2 fundamentally different views of the world. On one side, you have the psychological school of bourgeois economics. They treat economics as highly subjective. It all starts from individual psychology, natural qualities, and personal desires. On the other side, Marxist economics treats the system objectively. It starts from labor as the foundational, constitutive element of a historically determined social organism. One looks at the individual's relation to a specific thing. The other looks at the broad social relationships between human beings.
As we leave this debate between Böhm Bawerk and Hilferding, we really have to ask ourselves, what is the true purpose of economic theory in our modern world? Is it just a practical tool used to calculate and predict the fluctuating price of goods on a store shelf? Or is it a historical lens designed to reveal the deep, hidden laws of motion that actually govern human society? The answer you choose might just determine how you see the entire world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the data.